Sherlock Holmes had long since retired from the frenetic pace of London's criminal underworld. The bustling streets, the constant flurry of new cases, and the perennial hum of danger had faded into distant memories as he settled into a quiet life at his country estate in Sussex. But even in retirement, his sharp mind never dulled, always scanning for the subtleties in the world around him. It was on one particularly crisp autumn morning that a letter arrived, hand-delivered with the seal of the White House. The wax was imprinted with the presidential insignia, a symbol that sent an involuntary shiver down Holmes's spine. No simple request, no ordinary matter. It was clear from the moment the letter was opened that this was no routine correspondence. The letter itself was elegantly composed, but it carried an air of urgency. It read, "Dear Mr. Holmes, the President of the United States has a matter of utmost national security that requires your expertise. There have been a series of inexplicable thefts from the highest level of government archives, and we are at a loss as to who might be behind them. These documents contain sensitive information crucial to the safety and future of our nation. We are unable to trust our own agencies to solve this mystery. Your reputation precedes you, and we ask that you come to Washington, D.C. to investigate. You are requested to arrive at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Special Advisor to the President, White House, Washington." D.C. Holmes stared at the letter for several moments, his keen mind already spinning with possibilities. Who would dare to steal such high-stakes documents? And why? The gravity of the situation was not lost on him, but the prospect of solving a mystery that involved the highest offices of the United States was simply too compelling to resist. He turned to Watson, who was seated by the fire, reading through a medical journal. "Watson," Holmes began, his voice low but filled with intrigue, "it appears we have been called upon to solve a case of national importance." Watson looked up, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "National importance? Holmes, are you telling me that this is something beyond the usual burglaries and minor crimes you delight in solving?" "This," Holmes replied, unfolding the letter to show Watson, "appears to be something far more dangerous. A series of thefts from the White House itself, involving classified documents. And not just any documents, these are secrets that could shake the very foundation of governments." Watson leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "And you intend to investigate it? You know full well that our American friends aren't typically in need of a detective from London, especially one of your caliber." Holmes gave a half-smile. "Indeed, but I suspect this is no ordinary crime, and the fact that they would reach out to me implies that they are dealing with something far more sinister than mere theft." With a determined nod, Watson closed his journal and stood. "Well, Holmes, if we are to go to Washington, then we should leave at once. I would not want to miss the chance to witness such an intriguing mystery unfold." The decision was made. Within hours, Holmes and Watson were on a private jet bound for Washington, D.C., with the echoes of London's foggy streets left far behind. The plane cut through the sky like a bird of prey, and the closer they came to the American capital, the more Holmes felt the weight of the case pressing down on him. What awaited them at the White House was a puzzle unlike any other. Upon arriving at the White House, Holmes was greeted by a stern-faced officer who led them through the gates and into the secure depths of the building. They passed high-ceilinged halls adorned with history, but Holmes's sharp eyes were constantly scanning, noting every detail: the guards' movements, the state of the security systems, the subtle tension in the air. There was something in the atmosphere of the place, something that spoke of secrecy and unspoken truths. They were escorted to a private briefing room, where a man in a dark suit stood waiting. He introduced himself as Special Advisor to the President, a middle-aged man with a hard professional demeanor. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the advisor said, his voice measured but tinged with urgency. "I'm glad you've arrived. We need your expertise. We have a situation that has already caused a great deal of concern at the highest levels." Holmes wasted no time. "I presume you are referring to the thefts?" The advisor nodded. "Exactly. But this isn't your typical burglary. The documents that have been stolen are classified beyond anything the public could imagine. They contain sensitive intelligence on national security, covert operations, and our dealings with foreign powers. There are files here that could unravel alliances, destabilize governments, and even trigger wars." Holmes raised an eyebrow, intrigued but unfazed. He had faced cases of espionage before, though none on such a grand scale. Tell me, Mr. Advisor, what leads have you uncovered so far? How has the thief been able to bypass the most secure archives in the world? That's the troubling part, the advisor replied, sitting down behind a large desk. There are no signs of forced entry. No one has reported any suspicious activity around the archives. The thefts have been carefully planned and executed. It's as if the thief, or thieves, knew exactly where to look and when. Holmes leaned forward, his mind already working through the details. And the security systems? I presume they are state-of-the-art? Indeed, the advisor said, his tone tinged with frustration. The system was designed to prevent even the most sophisticated intrusions, yet the files have vanished one by one without a trace. Holmes stood up and began to pace slowly around the room, his hands behind his back. Do you have a list of individuals who had access to these files? The advisor hesitated for a moment. Yes, but... He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. This is the part that makes this case all the more troubling. The thefts were not carried out by an outsider. Holmes stopped pacing and looked directly at the advisor. You mean to say one of your own people is responsible? The advisor nodded gravely. It appears so. We have reviewed the security footage, and though no unauthorized personnel were recorded accessing the archives, we did find something strange. Every person with access to the files has been under suspicion, but each time we question them, they appear to have no knowledge of the thefts. And yet, the advisor's voice faltered for a moment, and yet we found an encrypted message left behind in one of the files. Holmes's interest was piqued. Encrypted? Who had the means to leave such a message? We don't know, the advisor replied. The message was not meant to be found. It was a simple string of characters, but it wasn't in any format we could recognize. Whoever left it clearly knew their way around cryptography. Holmes walked to the desk and leaned over, studying the advisor intently. Have you tried to decode it? We've made some progress, the advisor said. But we haven't been able to break it completely. We need someone who understands the complexity of such encryption. Holmes smiled slightly. I am afraid you are in luck, Mr. Advisor. Cryptography is one of my many talents. Without waiting for a response, Holmes took a seat at the desk and began to examine the encrypted message that had been recovered from the file. As he scrutinized the characters, his mind whirred with possibilities. The code was complex, but not beyond his capabilities. As the minutes ticked by, Holmes worked in silence, his hands moving swiftly over the paper, his mind unraveling the layers of the puzzle. Finally, he looked up, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. I believe I have cracked it, Holmes said, as he placed the decoded message on the desk in front of the advisor. The advisor leaned forward and read the message aloud. The truth lies beneath the White House. Trust no one. At that moment, the room seemed to grow colder, the weight of the message sinking in. Holmes and Watson exchanged a look, both realizing that they were standing on the edge of something much larger than they had anticipated. The case had just begun, and already it seemed to hint at a vast conspiracy lurking beneath the surface. Holmes stood, his mind racing. I believe, Watson, we are about to uncover more than stolen documents. As the advisor stared at the message in shock, Holmes turned to Watson, who nodded silently. The investigation had only just begun, and the trail had already led them to the most secure building in the world. But now Holmes knew that there were deeper secrets hidden within the White House itself, secrets that could change the course of history. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he observed the decoded message, the words hanging in the air like a silent warning. The truth lies beneath the White House, trust no one. A simple statement, yet its implications were staggering. Beneath the White House? What could that mean? Was there a hidden network? A clandestine system buried deep within the building, or perhaps an underground layer of secrets that had remained unseen for generations? The advisor, still gripping the edge of the desk, glanced at Holmes, his expression one of disbelief. You don't think, he began, but his voice faltered as if the magnitude of the situation was beginning to dawn on him. Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he straightened up, his gaze moving across the room, his mind already racing through potential scenarios. Beneath the White House, there were known secure vaults, but nothing quite like what the message hinted at. This wasn't merely about physical spaces, it was something much deeper, something older. Mr. Advisor, Holmes said slowly, choosing his words carefully, I believe the message is telling us that the very heart of this mystery lies below the surface, both literally and figuratively. But to truly understand its meaning, we must first gain a complete understanding of the building itself, its history, its structure, and any hidden rooms or passages that may exist. The advisor stood motionless for a moment, his fingers still tracing the edge of the paper. But the White House has been mapped and cataloged for centuries. There's nothing hidden here, Holmes. We've seen it all. Holmes didn't seem to hear the advisor's words. He was lost in thought, already forming a plan. History, Mr. Advisor, has a way of hiding its most valuable secrets in plain sight. It's not the building's outward appearance that concerns us. It's what's hidden beneath it, in places not even the most thorough blueprints can reveal. The advisor opened his mouth to speak but closed it again, clearly grappling with the idea that a building as famous, as public as the White House might hold hidden secrets. But how can you be sure? Holmes turned sharply, meeting his gaze with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Because, as I've seen time and time again, the most dangerous secrets are the ones that remain unseen by all but a few. And the fact that this message was encoded and hidden so cleverly suggests that the thief, or perhaps the thief's accomplice, is trying to tell us something. Something important. We simply have to know where to look. Holmes's mind was already working. He needed more information about the White House's construction. He needed to know the old legends, the rumors that had surrounded the building's design from its very inception. What had been concealed all those years ago? He turned to Watson, who had been listening intently, his hand rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Watson, Holmes said, I think it's time we paid a visit to the architectural history of the White House. We need to know what lies beneath this grand structure, and who better to assist us than those who've studied its foundations? Watson nodded, always ready to follow Holmes wherever his sharp mind led them. Shall we speak to the historian in charge of the White House archives? Precisely, Holmes replied, his mind already making calculations. There may be more to this building than even its own caretakers understand. The two men were soon escorted through the hallways of the White House, past ornate paintings and gilded doors until they reached the offices of the chief historian. The historian was a middle-aged man with a keen eye for detail, who spoke in a tone that seemed perpetually caught between professionalism and fascination with the history he so loved to preserve. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, the historian greeted them, offering them both a seat with a slight nod. I understand you've come to inquire about the White House's hidden history. I can't imagine what questions you may have, but I will do my best to assist. Holmes wasted no time. We are interested in the building's architectural design, specifically any areas that might not be well known, any passages or chambers hidden from public view. The White House has stood for centuries. What do you know of any underground sections that might exist, rooms or corridors not listed in the official records? The historian looked taken aback, clearly surprised by such a question. He adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable at being asked to delve into such a mysterious topic. Well, there are certainly the old tunnels that were built for security during the early years. There were rumors, of course, that there were secret rooms constructed in case of emergencies, but these were mostly urban legends. Holmes leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Urban legends, you say? And what about those tunnels? Have they been sealed off? Some have been, the historian admitted, but there are still parts of the old basement that have not been fully explored. Over the years, the building has been renovated and remodeled, but some sections remain difficult to access. Most historians focus on the publicly visible aspects of the White House, so, to be honest, there's little documentation on what remains hidden. Fascinating, Holmes said quietly, his mind racing. And where exactly might these difficult-to-access areas be located? The historian paused, considering. The most likely location is beneath the East Wing. There were modifications made during the Roosevelt administration, and some of those plans were altered during the Cold War. A few records mention a locked door. Very little is known about what's behind it. Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. That's precisely where we must begin. As the historian led Holmes and Watson to the East Wing, the atmosphere grew noticeably more tense. The White House was a place that exuded history at every turn, but beneath the grandeur lay something darker, something hidden from public view. The deeper they went into the heart of the building, the more Holmes could sense that the truth was closer than ever. They arrived at a heavy, iron-reinforced door, the kind of entrance that looked more suited to a bank vault than a presidential residence. The door was marked with a small plaque that read, "Authorized personnel only." Holmes examined it closely, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The lock, old but sturdy, looked like it had been rarely used in recent years. A sense of foreboding filled the air as he approached, his fingers brushing against the cold metal surface of the door. "This is it, Watson," he said, his voice low. "Behind this door lies the truth." The historian glanced nervously at the door and then at Holmes. "I've never been in there." "No one has. It's off limits." "You can't simply—" Holmes interrupted him with a calm, almost serene smile. "Don't worry, my good man. I have no intention of causing trouble. We simply wish to know what lies behind this door." Holmes examined the lock mechanism carefully, noting the subtle wear on the keyhole and the faint markings of someone who had tried to open it in the past. Without hesitation, he pulled out a set of tools from his coat pocket and began to work. Watson watched, his usual skepticism fading as Holmes's hands moved with practiced precision. The lock clicked open after a few moments, and the heavy door creaked slowly, revealing a narrow, dimly lit staircase that spiraled downward. Holmes turned to Watson, his expression grave. "It seems, my dear Watson, that the truth does indeed lie beneath." They descended into the darkness, the sounds of their footsteps echoing against the cold stone walls. The air grew cooler as they went deeper, and the only light came from the faint glow of Holmes's small lantern. Every step felt like they were moving further into the unknown, and with each step the sense of danger grew stronger. At the bottom of the stairs they reached a small chamber. It was empty, save for a large wooden chest that sat in the center of the room. The chest was old, antique even, and was adorned with intricate carvings, the craftsmanship remarkable but unsettling. Holmes approached it cautiously, his instincts telling him that this was no ordinary piece of furniture. He ran his fingers along the edges, testing the wood, and found a hidden latch. With a swift motion, he opened the chest. Inside, neatly stacked, were several bundles of old papers and maps. But among them, something caught Holmes's eye, a small leather-bound book, its cover worn and weathered. He picked it up carefully and opened it. It was a journal written in a hand that was unmistakable, his own. The room seemed to close in around Holmes as he stared down at the journal, his heart racing. How was it possible? This was a record of events he had no memory of. Events he had never written, never experienced. And yet the handwriting was undeniably his. "What is this?" Watson asked, his voice breaking the silence. Holmes didn't respond. His mind was already racing, the pieces falling into place. The truth was more complicated and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The journal contained secrets of the White House, secrets that had been buried for a reason. And now those secrets were coming to light. The game was afoot. Holmes's fingers trembled as he carefully turned the fragile pages of the journal. Each word seemed to pull him deeper into a mystery he had not anticipated, a puzzle that not only involved the White House, but seemed to reach back into his own past in ways he could not yet understand. The handwriting was unmistakably his own, but it was dated years earlier, long before he had set foot in Washington. The last entry was dated just a month before the thefts began, a chilling coincidence that did not sit well with him. "Holmes?" Watson asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. "What is it?" "What's in that book?" Holmes didn't immediately respond. His mind was already working through the implications of what he had found. The journal was a record of a mission he had no memory of. But it was far from being an ordinary case. It described covert operations, secret meetings with figures that Holmes knew only in passing, a few whose names were now infamous in the history of espionage. There were cryptic references to a hidden agenda that no one had ever told him about, and even more unsettling, a series of names that appeared repeatedly: political figures, high-ranking military officers, and the advisor who had first met them at the White House. "Watson," Holmes said at last, his voice low and tense, "this journal is far more than just a forgotten record. These entries, they speak of a secret operation I was involved in, one that was kept hidden from the public and apparently from me." Watson moved closer, leaning over Holmes's shoulder to read the page. "But that's impossible. How could you have forgotten something like this? And why is this journal here in a hidden chamber beneath the White House?" Holmes closed the journal slowly, a deep furrow forming on his brow. I don't know, Watson, but I intend to find out. This journal could be the key to everything. The thefts, the secret operation, even the strange message we uncovered. Whoever is behind this, they've gone to great lengths to keep these events buried, and I suspect that the thefts we're investigating are not mere robberies. They are part of something much larger, something that threatens the very heart of the nation. Watson absorbed Holmes' words, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. It wasn't just the thefts anymore. It was everything. The strange messages, the hidden journal, and now the growing suspicion that someone had been manipulating events from the shadows. They were no longer just investigators, they were now part of a far-reaching conspiracy. Holmes stood up abruptly, his mind already calculating the next steps. Watson, we need to speak to the advisor. Something isn't right. He's hiding something from us. He's involved whether he knows it or not, and we need to know who else is part of this network. The two men made their way back up the stairs, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on them. The White House had always been a symbol of stability and power, a beacon of democracy. But beneath its walls, Holmes now sensed that something far darker was at play. They returned to the upper levels, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous corridors. As they approached the advisor's office, Holmes's sharp mind was already working through the possibilities. The advisor had been too quick to provide information, too eager to steer the investigation in certain directions. Could it be that he was being manipulated? Or was he a willing participant in this dangerous game? They entered the office, and the advisor greeted them with the same carefully measured professionalism. But there was an unease in his eyes now, something Holmes could sense immediately. He was no longer the calm, collected man they had met earlier. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the advisor said, his voice tinged with a slight tremor. "I trust your investigation has gone well?" "Not as well as I had hoped," Holmes replied coolly. "We've uncovered something troubling. A journal, written in my own hand, describing a covert operation I was involved in. An operation that seems to have involved several high-ranking officials within this very building. And I must add, the names in that journal are not just familiar, they are connected to the very thefts we've been investigating." The advisor stiffened, his face blanching slightly. I don't understand," he stammered. "What are you implying, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes leaned forward, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "I'm implying that the thefts are part of a much larger conspiracy. A conspiracy that involves not just one or two individuals, but a network of people who have been using this building, its resources, and its secrets for their own ends. And I believe you are a part of it." The advisor's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, he stared at Holmes with an expression that bordered on disbelief and fear. "You're accusing me of being involved in this?" The advisor's voice was low, almost a whisper. I have nothing to do with this. You must believe me." Holmes's piercing gaze never wavered. "I believe you are hiding something you have been told to conceal, and I believe it is time for you to stop playing games with us." Watson stepped forward, his usual calm demeanor faltering just slightly in the face of the advisor's panic. "Mr. Holmes is right. There's far more at stake here than you've let on. The truth is starting to unravel, and if you're involved in this, it's only a matter of time before everything comes to light." The advisor swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "I've been following orders. Orders I didn't agree with, but I had no choice. If I spoke out, if I went to the authorities, then you would be a traitor," Holmes finished for him, his voice laced with cold certainty. "But not to the people of this country, no. You would be betraying those who have been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and if you were to speak out, you would be silenced." The advisor took a step back, his face twisted with fear and regret. "I never meant for things to go this far. I was just following orders." Enough!" Holmes interrupted. "I have no interest in your excuses. I want the truth." The advisor's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I can't tell you everything," he whispered. "But I can tell you this, there are more than just a few people involved. The thefts, the encoded messages, the journals, they are all part of a larger plan. A plan that involves not just the White House, but foreign governments, intelligence agencies, people who have been infiltrating the highest levels of power, and they've been doing so for decades." Holmes felt a chill run down his spine. "And what exactly is this plan? What is their end goal?" The advisor looked at him, his face filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Their goal is control, absolute control. Control of information, control of power. They want to destabilize the global order, to create chaos, and from that chaos they will rise to power. The thefts are just the beginning. The information they've taken could bring entire governments to their knees. Holmes took a step back, his mind racing. And you were involved in this plot, despite knowing its dangers? The advisor bowed his head, the weight of his actions clearly bearing down on him. I didn't know the full extent at first, but as things progressed I saw the truth, and now it's too late. Holmes stood still for a moment, taking in the gravity of the situation. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about stolen documents. It was about global manipulation, about forces so powerful that they could reshape the world order. But even as the truth began to emerge, Holmes couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. The advisor's confession was just the tip of the iceberg. The real mastermind, the true architect of this scheme, was still out there. "Mr. Advisor," Holmes said finally, his voice cold but resolute, "you will assist us in bringing those responsible to justice, or I will ensure that you have no place to hide from the consequences of your actions." The advisor nodded, his face drained of color. "I will help you, Mr. Holmes. I have no choice now." As they left the advisor's office, the weight of the situation settled heavily on Holmes's shoulders. The investigation had taken a dangerous turn, but it was far from over. There were still too many questions, too many hidden figures in the shadows, and somewhere deep within the White House the mastermind behind it all waited. Holmes wasn't sure who it was yet, but he knew one thing for certain. The game had changed, and they were about to play on a much larger stage. The walls of power were crumbling, and Holmes had a front-row seat to the destruction that was about to unfold. He turned to Watson, a new determination in his eyes. "Watson, we are on the precipice of something monumental, but I assure you we will find the truth, and when we do, no one will be able to stop it." The truth was out there, and Holmes would stop at nothing to uncover it. Holmes and Watson moved quickly through the White House's winding corridors, the weight of their newfound knowledge heavy in the air. The advisor's confession had been chilling, but it had also opened the floodgates. What began as a series of strange thefts had now blossomed into a far-reaching conspiracy, one that stretched across national borders and deeply embedded itself within the very heart of the United States government. The names in the journal were beginning to make sense, but the puzzle was far from complete. The advisor had spoken of a larger network, a web of influence that touched more than just a few figures in power. The true architect of this conspiracy was still hidden in the shadows, and Holmes knew that finding him would not be easy. As they walked, Holmes's mind was already calculating their next move. The advisor had promised to help, but his words seemed more like a desperate plea for survival than a genuine willingness to aid in the investigation. Holmes didn't trust him, not yet at least. There was something about the man's manner that had suggested he was as much a pawn as a player in this dangerous game. "We need to dig deeper, Watson," Holmes muttered, his voice low but resolute. "The advisor has revealed part of the puzzle, but I suspect we're still missing key pieces. We must find out who is pulling the strings." Watson nodded, his own thoughts mirroring Holmes's concerns. "And what about the information he gave us? Do you think we can trust him to follow through?" "I don't know," Holmes replied, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "But for now, we have no choice but to use him. If he's telling the truth, we might be closer to the mastermind than we realize, but we must remain vigilant. The danger is far greater than either of us imagined." As they approached the door to their temporary quarters, Holmes paused, his keen eyes scanning the surroundings. A fleeting movement caught his attention. A figure slipping down a nearby hallway, looking back furtively as if trying to avoid being seen. Holmes's instincts flared to life. "Watson," he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "Did you see that?" Watson turned, his eyes narrowing. "Yes. Someone was moving quickly and they were clearly trying to stay out of sight." Without a word, Holmes darted down the corridor, his footsteps light but quick. Watson followed close behind, his heart racing as the two men navigated the maze-like hallways of the White House. They turned a corner, and there, at the far end of the corridor, the figure they had seen earlier had disappeared behind a large wooden door. Holmes' mind was working at a rapid pace. The White House was filled with people, some legitimate staff, some with ulterior motives, But this person, whoever they were, had been acting strangely. Why were they trying to avoid being seen? And why had they chosen this particular hallway? One that led directly to the lower floors, the more secure areas of the building. Without hesitation, Holmes reached the door and gently tested the handle. It was unlocked. He glanced at Watson, who gave him a brief nod. They both slipped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls. At first, Holmes thought it might be a storage closet or an office, but as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw a large desk covered with papers, blueprints, and maps. The walls were lined with bookshelves, most of them filled with leather-bound volumes that seemed ancient. But it wasn't the books that caught Holmes's attention. It was the large map pinned to the wall. The map was old, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. It depicted a series of underground tunnels beneath the White House, some of which Holmes recognized from his earlier research, but others were marked with symbols he had never seen before. There were several red X's scattered across the map, each one corresponding to a different part of the building. And at the center of the map, near the deepest part of the White House's foundations, was a large circle with a single word written inside it: control. Watson stepped forward, studying the map with growing concern. "What is this, Holmes? What does it mean?" Holmes studied the map closely, his fingers brushing over the markings. His mind was racing as he made the connections. "This map shows more than just the White House's layout," he said slowly. "It shows a network, an underground system designed for something much more sinister. Control. This is what they've been after all along. Whoever created this map, they've been working in the shadows, controlling things from beneath the surface. These tunnels, these passages, they were built to conceal something. But what?" Watson pressed. "What could be so important that it needs to be hidden?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. His mind was already connecting the dots. The journal, the stolen files, the encoded messages. It was all part of a larger strategy, a plan that reached back decades. And now it seemed that the answer lay in these hidden tunnels, beneath the very building that symbolized the power of the nation. "We need to find out what lies at the heart of this control," Holmes said finally. "This is no ordinary conspiracy, Watson. This is a battle for power, and it has been going on for far longer than we realized. Whoever is behind this is not just interested in stealing documents. They're after something much more dangerous." They carefully examined the room for any other clues. On the desk, they found several documents, most of which appeared to be highly classified government reports. But one in particular caught Holmes's eye. It was a letter sealed with a wax stamp that bore the symbol of the White House. The letter was addressed to the advisor, the very man who had confessed to his involvement in the scheme. Holmes broke the seal with practiced ease and unfolded the letter. The message inside was brief, but its contents were telling. "The time is coming. Prepare the files. We need everything in place. The transfer must happen soon. Remember, no mistakes. Trust no one outside the circle." Holmes studied the letter carefully, his brow furrowing as he processed the implications. "This is it, Watson. This letter is proof of the conspiracy's scope. The advisor is not acting alone. There are others involved, others who are working to ensure the success of this plan." Watson leaned over to get a better look at the letter. "But what does it mean? Prepare the files. What files? And why the secrecy?" Holmes folded the letter with precision, his thoughts already racing ahead. "I believe the files refer to the stolen documents we've been investigating. Whoever is behind this is gathering all the pieces necessary to execute their plan, whatever that plan may be. And they're working quickly. We're getting closer, Watson, but we need more information. We need to know who else is involved, and we need to uncover what they're planning to do with these files." They left the room quickly, retracing their steps back to the main corridor. But as they rounded the corner, they were met with an unexpected sight. The advisor was waiting for them, standing just outside the door, a tense expression on his face. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the advisor greeted them, his voice strained. "I know you found something, but I must warn you, you're getting too close. There are forces at play here that you don't understand." Holmes didn't flinch. "I understand more than you think, Mr. Advisor, and I assure you the truth will come to light, no matter how deep you try to bury it." The advisor's gaze faltered, and for a brief moment Holmes could see the fear in his eyes. It was clear that the advisor was no longer in control of the situation. But as he looked at Holmes, something flickered behind his eyes, something that suggested he might be more than just a passive participant. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Mr. Holmes," the advisor warned, his voice low, "you're poking at something you can't control." Holmes stepped forward, his face set with determination. "Then it's a good thing I'm not afraid of danger." As they walked past the advisor, Holmes glanced over his shoulder. "We'll see you again, Mr. Advisor. I suggest you start preparing yourself for the truth." The tension in the air was palpable as the advisor remained rooted to the spot, his eyes following them as they continued down the corridor. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous things became, but Holmes wasn't about to back down. He could feel the endgame drawing near, and whatever it took, he would uncover the mastermind behind this conspiracy. Watson, walking beside him, looked at Holmes. "What now?" "We keep moving forward," Holmes replied. "We've learned too much to stop now. The files are the key to everything. And once we find them, we'll have the answers we've been searching for." The game was on, and the stakes were higher than ever. Holmes and Watson left the advisor standing at the threshold of the corridor, the weight of the encounter hanging heavily in the air. The brief warning the advisor had offered, his cryptic warning about playing a dangerous game, only fueled Holmes's resolve. There was no turning back now. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but there was still so much they didn't understand. As they made their way through the hallways, the tension between them was palpable. Holmes's mind was racing, his thoughts moving at a speed that outpaced his ability to voice them. Every new clue seemed to reveal more questions. The journal, the map, the coded messages, all of it pointed to a hidden network beneath the White House, a secret cabal with plans far beyond mere thefts of classified information. Holmes felt as if they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. Every step they took now would bring them closer to the truth, but it would also put them in ever greater danger. Watson, walking beside Holmes, couldn't help but notice the change in his companion. Gone was the confident, methodical detective he had known for years. In his place was a man driven by something deeper, something personal. He had uncovered pieces of his own past that were tied to this case, and he couldn't rest until it was all laid bare. Watson could see the strain in his eyes, the subtle signs that Holmes was becoming more and more consumed by the mystery. "Holmes," Watson ventured, his voice quiet but filled with concern, "you're thinking about it again, aren't you? About the journal. About your involvement in all this." Holmes didn't answer immediately. He was staring ahead, lost in thought. After a moment, he finally spoke, his voice softer than Watson had ever heard it. "Yes, Watson. I can't shake the feeling that everything I've been working for, everything I've built, is connected to this in ways I don't yet understand. But I know one thing for sure. We're no longer just dealing with stolen documents or a simple conspiracy. This is something much larger, and it has been hiding in plain sight all along." Watson paused for a moment, absorbing Holmes's words. "But you can't do it alone, Holmes. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. We're in this together." Holmes glanced at Watson, his expression unreadable. For a moment it seemed as though the detective might say something more, something profound. But instead he simply nodded. "You're right, Watson, and we'll see this through. Together." They turned another corner and Holmes's gaze caught the figure of the advisor again, standing further down the hallway. This time, however, he was not alone. A tall man in a dark suit stood beside him, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Holmes immediately recognized the man as someone he had seen briefly at the briefing, the head of security for the White House. The advisor and the head of security were speaking in hushed tones, clearly unaware of Holmes and Watson's approach. Without a word, Holmes motioned for Watson to step back into the shadows with him. They remained still, listening intently as the conversation unfolded. "I told you." The advisor's voice was tinged with frustration. "They're getting too close. Holmes is asking the right questions. We can't afford to let them dig any deeper." The head of security's voice, calm and measured, responded, "You know the plan. The files must be moved, and we can't risk anyone getting their hands on them. Holmes and Watson may be a problem, but we've dealt with problems like them before. There's something different about them," the advisor insisted. "Holmes is not like the others. He's resourceful. And Watson? Watson's loyalty to him is unwavering. They won't stop." The head of security let out a low chuckle. "You've underestimated him before." Holmes is a detective. He'll get close, yes, but we control the narrative. We control the information. The White House will be fine. Fine? The advisor's voice grew sharper. Do you even know what's at stake? The files we're moving aren't just about information. They're about power, the kind of power that could shift the balance of the world. Holmes and Watson exchanged a brief silent glance. The mention of the files and power confirmed what Holmes had suspected all along. This wasn't just about espionage or stolen secrets. The files held the key to something much more dangerous, the ability to manipulate the course of history itself. As the conversation continued, Holmes carefully pulled Watson back into the shadows, retreating quietly to a nearby stairwell. We can't afford to waste any more time. The files are being moved, and the people behind this conspiracy are more determined than ever to silence us. Watson nodded, his expression grim. We need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Holmes's mind was already racing through their next course of action. He had a new lead, a direction to follow. The advisor and the head of security were connected to this larger conspiracy, but they were only pawns. There were others, more powerful individuals, who had orchestrated this entire operation. And it was clear that the stakes were far higher than any of them had initially imagined. We need to locate the files, Holmes said decisively. And we need to find out where they're being moved. The files hold the key to understanding everything, the hidden network, the power struggles, and the ultimate goal of the people behind it all. But as they made their way down the stairwell and out into the courtyard, Holmes's thoughts turned inward again. The journal had revealed so much, yet so little. He had been involved in something far larger than he realized, and it was now painfully clear that the truth was going to come at a high cost. The next few hours were a blur of careful planning and silent movement. Holmes and Watson continued their investigation, following the faint trail of clues left behind by the people who were clearly trying to stay one step ahead of them. They had no time to waste. The files were being moved, and they needed to find out where and why before it was too late. Holmes returned to the White House's underground archives, using his keen eye for detail to spot anything out of the ordinary. His mind raced as he worked, noting the subtle signs of tampering and the faint traces of hidden movements. It wasn't long before he found what he was looking for. A hidden access panel, one that had been cleverly concealed beneath a stack of old records, caught his attention. Holmes carefully pried it open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway that led further beneath the White House. The cold air that rushed up from the depths of the tunnel sent a shiver down his spine. "This is it, Watson," Holmes whispered. "The answer's down here. We've found the way to the heart of the operation." Watson's eyes gleamed with determination, and the two men descended into the passage. The walls were lined with stone, the air damp and musty. But the deeper they went, the more palpable the tension became. Holmes could feel it, the presence of something larger, something waiting for them in the darkness. At the end of the passage, they found a heavy door unlike anything they had seen before. It was reinforced with steel and had no visible locks or handles, but Holmes immediately knew that this was the final barrier, the last piece of the puzzle. The door was the key to the files, to the power, and to the truth. Holmes looked at Watson, his face set with determination. "Whatever lies behind this door, Watson, will change everything. We must be ready." They approached the door, and Holmes's hand rested on the cold metal. A deep breath escaped his lips, and without another word, he pushed forward. The door creaked open, revealing a vast high-tech room filled with rows of servers, monitors, and encrypted data storage units. But what caught Holmes's eye wasn't the technology. It was the figure standing in the center of the room waiting for them. The man was tall, dressed in dark clothing, his face hidden in the shadows, but his eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Holmes as he stepped inside. "Holmes," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "I've been expecting you." Holmes's pulse quickened, but his expression remained steady. "You're behind all of this, aren't you?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Behind everything, Holmes, perhaps, but only because I knew that one day you would be the one to uncover the truth." The game had changed again, but this time Holmes knew that the end was closer than ever. Holmes stood still, his gaze fixed on the figure that stood before him. The room was stark, illuminated by the soft hum of servers and blinking lights that cast long shadows across the walls. The man in front of them was calm, composed, but his presence was suffocating in its certainty. His eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to size up Holmes in an instant, and there was something unsettling about the way he spoke, like he knew exactly how this moment would unfold. "Holmes?" the man repeated, his voice smooth, almost predatory. "I've been expecting you." Holmes felt a chill run down his spine, though he didn't allow it to show. He studied the man carefully, trying to place him. There was an air of familiarity about him, someone from Holmes's past perhaps, or someone who had orchestrated the events unfolding around them. "What is this?" Holmes asked, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. "Who are you?" The man smiled, a thin, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. "I imagine you've been wondering who has been pulling the strings behind all of this. I must admit, I thought you'd be a bit more surprised to see me." Holmes's eyes narrowed. He had no immediate recollection of this man, but his instincts told him he was no stranger. He felt the weight of recognition hanging in the air, but he couldn't quite place it. "I'm afraid I don't share your sentiment," Holmes replied, his tone sharp. "You've been playing a dangerous game, and it's finally time for you to show your hand. Who are you, and what is your connection to the stolen files?" The man's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "Ah, the files. Yes, I suppose I should have expected you to catch on to that little detail. It's not just about stolen documents, Holmes. It's about power, control, the ability to shape the course of history." Holmes's mind raced, processing the man's words. He had heard similar things before, hints of global manipulation, of shadowy figures who pulled the strings of governments and organizations. But this felt different. This wasn't some faceless conspiracy. The man standing in front of him was far more than a mere pawn. "You think you can control history by stealing secrets?" Holmes asked, his voice steady, but his curiosity growing. "You're nothing more than a puppet in a much larger game." The man's eyes gleamed with a dangerous, knowing light. "You're right about one thing, Holmes. I'm not in control, but I know who is, and that's why I'm here. I've been gathering information, secrets like the ones you're so determined to uncover. And now it's all coming to fruition. You've played your part in this, and you've done well to get this far, but now it's over." Holmes felt a flicker of tension at the back of his mind. This wasn't just an ordinary confrontation. It was the culmination of something far more intricate. The man's words suggested that he wasn't acting alone, that he was working in service to something far larger than himself. Holmes was no stranger to conspiracies, but this one had more layers than he had anticipated. "Who is behind this?" Watson's voice broke through the silence, his eyes scanning the room for any hidden threats. "Who are you working for?" The man's lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. "Ah, Watson. Always the loyal companion, always one step behind. But it's too late for questions now. You've seen enough." Holmes stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "I've seen more than enough. I've uncovered your plan, your network, your twisted manipulation. But there's one thing I still don't understand. What is your endgame? What do you hope to achieve by stealing these files and hiding behind shadows?" The man's expression darkened. He took a slow step forward, his hands folding behind his back in a posture of finality. "My endgame, Holmes, is simple. I'm going to change the world. These files contain information that could bring entire nations to their knees. The world has grown stagnant. Corruption runs deep and power is concentrated in the hands of the few. But I will expose the truth. I will tear down the walls that keep this world in the dark." Holmes's mind reeled at the audacity of the man's words. This wasn't just about espionage or information. This was about tearing apart the very foundations of the global order. And to do that, he needed far more than stolen secrets. He needed leverage, control, something that would bring the world to its knees. "You're a fool," Holmes said quietly, his voice cold. "You think you can control history by manipulating the truth? You'll only destroy everything you claim to care about, and when the dust settles, you'll be left with nothing but chaos." The man's eyes flashed with a dangerous gleam. "Maybe so, but in the end, chaos will be the only thing that's real. Everything else, governments, alliances, peace, are just constructs, falsehoods. And when I'm done, you'll see the truth." Holmes took a step back, his mind working quickly. There was something missing here, something that the man had yet to reveal. What truth exactly? What is it that you're hiding, and why is it so important? The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned and walked over to a nearby desk, where several monitors displayed complex data streams. Holmes followed his gaze, trying to make sense of the screens. The data was incomprehensible to him at first glance, But it was clear that it was more than just random numbers. It was a map. A map of the world overlaid with encrypted lines of text and coordinates. Holmes stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "What is this?" The man turned, his gaze locking onto Holmes. "This, Holmes, is the beginning of the end. The data you see here is the key to everything. It's the final step in the plan, one that will expose the world for what it truly is. This isn't just about America or the White House. It's about the entire global order. This data, this information will unravel everything. Every government, every corporation, every powerful entity will be exposed for their lies." Holmes's eyes widened as the implications of the man's words began to sink in. This wasn't just about destabilizing governments. This was about tearing down the very structure of society itself. The data he saw on the screens was more than just confidential documents. It was the foundation of global power, the hidden truths that could bring everything to ruin. The man smiled, sensing Holmes's realization. "You see now, don't you? This is the power we've been after. And you, Holmes, you're just a stepping stone to its ultimate release. You and your pesky little investigation. But now it's time for the world to see the truth." Holmes's thoughts raced. The files, the encrypted messages, the hidden tunnels, it all made sense now. This wasn't just about information. It was about exposing secrets that would shatter the very fabric of global power. The man standing in front of him wasn't just a pawn. He was part of a much larger, more dangerous movement. Holmes glanced at Watson, who had been silent, taking in the unfolding scene. Watson's eyes met his, and in that moment, Holmes knew that the stakes were higher than ever. This was no longer just a battle for stolen documents. This was a battle for the future of the world. "Why do you think you can control this?" Holmes asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "You're playing with fire. When the truth comes to light, it will destroy you along with everything else." The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold resolve. "It's already too late, Holmes. The wheels are in motion and nothing can stop them now. You can try to stop me, but in the end, the truth will be revealed, and when it is, you'll understand why this had to happen." Holmes felt a surge of urgency. The pieces were falling into place, and he realized that if he didn't act quickly, the man's plan would succeed. The world would change forever, and the power structures that had been in place for centuries would be torn apart. "I don't believe you," Holmes said firmly. "You think you can control the truth, but the truth always has a way of escaping. And when it does, it will destroy you. You won't be the one to shape history. History will shape you." The man's expression darkened. "We'll see, Holmes. We'll see." With that, the man stepped back, moving toward a control panel on the far side of the room. Holmes's mind raced. He knew he couldn't let the man complete whatever he was planning. But before he could act, the room was plunged into darkness. The hum of the servers ceased, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the room. Holmes's heart raced as he realized that this was the moment they had been dreading, the final confrontation. The darkness enveloped them, swallowing the room in an instant. Holmes stood still, his senses heightened, every muscle in his body tense and alert. The humming of the servers had ceased, and now only the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the silence. His eyes had yet to adjust fully to the absence of light, but his mind was already at work. He knew that time was running out. The man, the mastermind behind this operation, was making his move. The files, the power, the secrets, they were all in play, and the stakes were higher than ever. Watson's voice broke through the darkness, low and urgent. "Holmes, what's happening? What's going on?" Holmes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on the sound of the footsteps, trying to gauge their direction. They were deliberate, measured. Someone was moving with purpose, but whether they were friend or foe, he couldn't yet tell. The cold, metallic scent of the room mixed with the faint smell of electrical burn, the kind that came from a system under strain. A flash of light flickered, casting brief shadows across the room, only to vanish as quickly as it appeared. Then suddenly a low mechanical whine filled the space. A screen buzzed to life, its glow illuminating the room in a dim, sickly light. On the monitor appeared a series of numbers, scrolling rapidly, coordinates possibly, or perhaps a countdown. "We don't have much time, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. "Whatever the man is doing, it's happening now. We need to stop him before it's too late." Before Watson could reply, the door to the room slammed shut with a loud, metallic thud, and they were sealed inside. Holmes quickly moved toward the control panel, his hands brushing over the surface in search of a way to disable whatever mechanism had trapped them. His eyes scanned the room for any clue, any hint of how to reverse the situation. The man's voice echoed through the darkened space, calm and unfazed. "You're too late, Holmes. The process has already begun. You can't stop it now. The truth will be exposed. Nothing will be the same after this." Holmes's thoughts raced. The system was too complex to dismantle with a few quick movements. Whatever the man was doing, it wasn't just about access to information. It was about something far more insidious, something designed to disrupt, to tear down the structures of power that had been in place for centuries. But there was something else in the man's words, something that suggested this wasn't just a one-sided battle. The wheels were in motion, but they weren't entirely under the man's control either. Holmes reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small device, an encrypted communicator he had kept hidden for emergencies. He had used it on rare occasions, but it was an invaluable tool when things went awry. He pressed a series of buttons quickly, hoping that someone somewhere was monitoring the line. No response, Holmes muttered under his breath, frustration creeping into his voice, but there was no time to dwell on it. Whatever the man was doing, they couldn't afford to wait any longer. "Watson, get to the servers. We need to stop whatever process he's initiated. We may still be able to shut it down." Watson, always quick to act, nodded and moved toward the row of servers. His fingers worked rapidly, trying to access the data streams on the monitors. The machines whirred to life under his touch, but the interface was encrypted. It was clear the man had planned for this, had anticipated that someone might try to stop him. "The encryption is almost impenetrable," Watson called back. "But I think I can work through it. Just give me a few more minutes." Holmes turned toward the monitor, his eyes narrowing as the numbers continued to scroll. A countdown, he realized, ticking down toward something catastrophic. He had to think quickly. The man was right, they had already come too far. The world was on the brink of being exposed, but that didn't mean they couldn't stop it. There was always a way. A new sound filled the room, sharp and mechanical, followed by a sudden jarring buzz. Holmes's head whipped around. The man had activated something, a mechanism in the room that triggered a cascade of warning lights, red and flashing, growing in intensity. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever had been planned was now irrevocably in motion. "We don't have much time, Watson," Holmes said again, urgency in his voice. "We need to act now." Watson's face was set in concentration as his hands flew over the keys. "I'm trying, Holmes. This system is unlike anything I've ever seen." The seconds stretched out, each one longer than the last. Holmes could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. Either they would stop the process or watch as everything they had fought for unraveled. "Holmes," Watson said suddenly, his voice tight with tension. "I think I found something. There's a subroutine running, embedded deep in the system. It's an access point. If I can disable it, we can stop everything." Holmes stepped closer, his breath steady but his mind racing. "Can you do it?" Watson hesitated for a split second, his eyes flicking to the screen, then back to Holmes. "I'm not sure, but I have to try," Holmes nodded. "Do it." Watson's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The room was filled with the sound of the whirring machines, the urgent flicker of the warning lights. The man stood silently in the background, watching, waiting. The seconds ticked by, each one laden with the weight of the unknown. Then, with a soft click, the screens flickered. The countdown halted. The warning lights faded to black. Holmes exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well done, Watson. You've done it." But their victory was short-lived. As the last of the lights dimmed, the man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You've delayed it, Holmes, but you haven't stopped it. The data is still out there, and you're running out of time." Holmes's eyes flicked to the man, his mind working furiously. "What do you mean, out there?" "The system's been shut down." The man's smile was thin, almost amused. "You think you've stopped me?" "The truth is, it was never about the machines. It was always about the data. The files you so desperately tried to protect are already in the hands of those who will use them." Holmes's blood ran cold as he realized what the man was saying. It wasn't the systems they had stopped. It was the people who had already gained access to the information. The files were in motion, carried by a network far beyond the White House, far beyond anything Holmes had anticipated. "No," Holmes breathed, a sense of dread creeping over him. It can't be. Who else? You've never truly understood, have you? The man cut in, his voice filled with a dark satisfaction. It's not about who holds the information. It's about who controls the release of it. You may have stopped the process here, but the wheels are already turning. People are watching, and soon the world will see. Holmes's mind reeled as the enormity of the man's words sank in. They hadn't just been dealing with a rogue individual or a small conspiracy. They had stumbled into a much larger game, one that spanned continents involving players at every level of global power. The information they had been trying to protect had already been disseminated. Who is behind this? Holmes asked, his voice sharp, trying to grasp the last threads of control. Who are you working for? The man's eyes darkened and he stepped back, his face a mask of indifference. Does it really matter? You'll never know, not now, not after everything you've seen. It's already too late. Holmes's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more dangerous than the last. The man's words echoed in his mind. It's already too late, but was it? No, Holmes said, his voice suddenly clear. It's not too late, not yet. The world may be on the brink of change, but there is still time to turn this around. Watson, who had been watching the exchange in stunned silence, turned to Holmes, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and hope. What do you mean? How can we stop this now? Holmes looked at Watson, his mind already formulating a plan. There are still pieces of the puzzle we haven't seen, and if we can find them, we can still make a difference. But it's going to take everything we've got. The room fell silent once more, the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. But Holmes was certain of one thing now. This was only the beginning. The truth had been exposed, but the final chapter was still unwritten. We're not finished yet, Watson, Holmes said, his voice low and determined. Not by a long shot. Holmes stood there in the dim light of the control room, his mind racing, the weight of the world seeming to press down on him. The man, the mastermind who had orchestrated the events that had led them to this moment, was now gone, his words hanging in the air like a lingering, poisonous mist. The countdown had stopped, but the battle was far from over. Holmes knew that he had only a sliver of time left to make sense of what had happened, and what was still to come. Watson, standing beside him, was visibly tense, his eyes scanning the now quiet room, but it was clear he was struggling to reconcile what they had just heard. Holmes, Watson said quietly, you've always known the world works in shadows, but this is something beyond even what we expected. Who could orchestrate something like this on such a scale? Holmes's gaze shifted to the empty space in front of them. The server's silent now, but the faint hum of a far-off machine seemed to echo in the back of his mind. The question, Watson, is not who could do this. It's who has done it. And why? Holmes had spent decades solving crimes, untangling webs of deceit, but never had he faced a conspiracy this vast, this insidious. He had been drawn into something much bigger than a simple espionage operation. It was a war for control of the truth itself. The files, the stolen documents, the data that had been disseminated. It was not just about secrets anymore. It was about shaping the world. Watson was still processing, but Holmes had already set his mind on their next move. The data is out there, Watson, but not all of it, not yet. We have only glimpsed the surface of a much darker plan. The people who are behind this have used the White House and its archives as a pawn, but the real power lies elsewhere. Somewhere deep within this conspiracy, there are answers we've yet to uncover. And if we don't act swiftly, this world will never return to the way it was. Watson nodded, his expression resolute. Then let's not waste time. If we can't stop it here, we need to follow the trail wherever it leads. Holmes felt the weight of the words as they left his lips. Yes, Watson, but we must be careful. The people we are up against are far more powerful than we ever imagined. We are now part of a much larger game, and the pieces are already in motion. Whoever is behind this has more than just files. They have influence. They have resources. The realization hit Holmes with a sudden cold clarity. Whoever the man was, whoever had engineered this whole operation, he wasn't alone. They were part of a vast network that stretched across governments, corporations, and perhaps even the media itself. The truth, when it came, would be much more dangerous than anyone had predicted. We need to expose them, Watson, Holmes said, his voice hardening. We need to find who is really pulling the strings before the world falls into chaos. The tension in the air was palpable. Holmes could feel the final threads of the mystery pulling together, and yet he knew that the answers were still elusive. hiding just beyond reach. The man's cryptic warnings were chilling, but they only spurred Holmes forward. The truth might be out there, but it had been manipulated, distorted, and carefully controlled. And if there was anything Holmes knew, it was that the truth always had a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply it was buried. As Holmes and Watson made their way out of the darkened room, the weight of their mission pressing on them, Holmes couldn't help but think of the words the man had spoken before disappearing into the shadows. "The world will see the truth," he had said, "and when it does, everything will change." But Holmes wasn't sure if the truth could truly be revealed in the way the man had intended. The world had always been in the hands of those who controlled information, and while the revelation of secrets could bring down empires, it could just as easily replace one form of control with another. As they left the building, Holmes paused, looking back at the towering structure of the White House. It was a symbol of power, yes, but it was also a symbol of something else, something far more fragile than it appeared. Beneath the grandeur and the polished exterior, the heart of the system was vulnerable. The truth was out there, but finding it, exposing it, would take more than just uncovering the documents. It would take understanding the forces that had shaped the world from the shadows. Holmes turned to Watson, a look of determination in his eyes. "This is far from over. We've stopped one part of the plan, but there's much more to uncover. We'll need to trace every connection, follow every lead, and expose those who think they can manipulate the world. They may have thought they could control the truth, but they've underestimated us." Watson nodded, his expression a mixture of resolve and apprehension. "So what do we do next?" Holmes smiled, the familiar spark of resolve flickering in his eyes. "We begin the next chapter of this investigation. The pieces are scattered, but we'll find them. And when we do, we'll expose the architects of this plot. They've shown their hand. Now it's our turn." And as the two of them walked into the cold night, the uncertainty of the future pressing in on them, Holmes knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, he would never stop until the truth was revealed, no matter the cost. Because the truth, after all, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The story ended not with a conclusion, but with the beginning of a new chapter. Holmes and Watson had uncovered a conspiracy of unimaginable scale, but the journey was far from over. There were more shadows to chase, more secrets to uncover, and more dangerous forces to expose. The game had only just begun, and the truth, always elusive, always shifting, was still out there, waiting to be brought to light.